Alrighty. Okay. After a bit of testing, hello, everyone. It is I, Nathan Gaming, and welcome to another socio-political episode where today I am reacting to Slavoj Zizek. I'm sure I butchered the hell out of that name, and debates Jordan Peterson. So this was recommended to me by someone from the comments section in one of my socio-political videos. His name, I don't know if I should say his name or not, but just, I'm sure if you just... Anyways, point is, he basically recommended that if I wanted to continue making videos of this nature, I could certainly watch this debate in particular, which, honestly, I'm not opposed to, but I'm not opposed to us, doing socio-political commentary, but my problem, of course, is that I'm not exactly the kind of person who should probably, I have my own opinions, but I'm not exactly what you might consider to be a socio-political person. So, the most I'm going to get out of this is a very mundane take from this debate at most. And if they do talk about things that I can actually understand, maybe even articulate in some fashion, that's great. But, I wouldn't go into this thinking that I'm going to have a more nuanced look or approach to this debate. I'm just going to be reacting to it because one of you guys, said that, hey, if you're going to continue to make reactions of these types of things, you might as well look at this one, right? And I'm like, you know what? You're the first person in my comments section who has watched my video to ask me to react or even watch a different video. He's the first person who basically requested that I watch something, so I'm like, how the fuck am I supposed to argue that? So, without further ado, of course, here it is. Now, one thing that you will notice is that I gotten myself a new capture card, boys. I've gotten myself a brand new capture card. It works wonders, let me tell you. It is a magnificent capture card. As you can tell, the quality is pretty great. It actually runs at 60 frames. It's at higher resolutions. It's at a resolution that's actually comparable. I mean, it's also the resolution of my actual laptop, which is not too bad of a resolution for a laptop. So yeah, all in all, I'm pretty happy with this capture card. But yeah, so without further delay, let's go ahead and get right into it. I have played around with the volume of the capture card a little bit here and there, but for the most part, I'm not too sure how the volume is going to be going through this. So yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and play it by ear. I hope I got it nice and perfect because it was picking up everything else pretty fine. But, I never know with these things. I'll think I'll have it one way, and then I find out as soon as I rewatch and listen to the video that, oh, the audio's fucked up still. But yeah. Alrighty. Without further ado, let's just get right into it. This is the Slavoj Zizek debates Jordan Peterson.
Thank you. A warm welcome to all of you here this evening, both those here in the theater in Toronto and those following online. It's not very often that you see a country's largest theater packed for an intellectual debate, but that's what we're all here for tonight. Please join me. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Slavoj Zizek and Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Slavoj is how you say that? Slavoj Zizek? Yeah, sorry about that. I accidentally hit the pause button. I don't know why I was hitting pause on that thing. I was trying to hit pause on this thing. Anyways, Sorry if that seemed a little weirdly disjointed for a second. But yeah, one thing I also want to preface is that I did watch a interview of this guy that Peterson's about to debate, and I gotta say I'm not too sure what to make of him. He seems pretty humble, and if anything from my last videos is to be evidence of, he certainly has a similar mastication issue. But I pretty much fixed that. I don't know why my mic was picking up so much minute details because it usually doesn't do that outside of OBS for some fucking reason. But anyways, that being said, you know, I did watch an interview uh, of this guy, and I thought he's got some interesting points, but it was about a topic. It was about topics of which that I'm not too familiar with. So yeah, going into this, I'm also not sure what they're about to debate. As you can tell by this, I can't really tell what they're about to debate, but I'm assuming they're just going to debate about things that they're both, interested in. So, yeah, let's just get into it.
Just a few words of introduction. There can be few things, I think, now more urgent and necessary in an age of reactionary partisan allegiance and degraded civil discourse than real thinking about hard questions. The very premise of tonight's event is that we all participate in the life of thought, not merely opinion or prejudice, but the realm of truth, accessed through evidence and argument. But these two towering figures of different disciplines and domains share more than a commitment to thinking itself. They are both highly attuned to ideology and the mechanisms of power, and yet they are not principally political thinkers. They are both concerned with more fundamental matters: meaning, truth, freedom. So it seems to me likely we will see tonight not only deep differences, but also surprising agreement on deep questions. Dr. Slavoj Zizek is a philosopher. He has not one, but two doctoral degrees, one in philosophy from the University of Ljubljana, and a second in psychoanalysis from University. Let's hear it for psychoanalysis. From the University of Paris 8. He is now a professor at the Institute of Sociology and Philosophy at the University of Ljubljana and the director of the Birkbeck Institute for the Humanities at the University of London. He has published more than 36 books, many on the most seminal philosophers of the 19th and 20th centuries. He is a dazzling theorist with extraordinary range. A global figure for decades, he turns again and again with dialectical power to radical questions of emancipation, subjectivity, and art.
I probably should have also mentioned this earlier too, but I'm not going to be pausing a whole lot during this video because, as you could probably tell just by looking at this runtime, it's a fucking 2 hours. I don't know if I'm gonna go through and edit this video, but I'm gonna watch this interview. I'm gonna pause in areas where I think I have a bit more of an opinion on on specific topics, but otherwise I'm gonna be mostly just kind of keeping everything sparse and a tad quiet. So yeah.
Dr. Jordan Peterson is an academic and clinical psychologist. His doctorate was awarded by McGill University, and he was subsequently we got some McGill graduates out here. He was subsequently professor of psychology at Harvard University and then the University of Toronto, where he is today. The author of 2 books and well over 100 academic articles, Dr. Peterson's intellectual roots likewise lie in the 19th and early 20th centuries, where his reading of Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, and above all, Carl Jung, inform his interpretation of ancient myths, of 20th century totalitarianism, and especially his endeavor to counter contemporary nihilism. His 12 Rules for Life is a global bestseller, and his lectures and podcasts are followed by millions around the world.
The one thing I will say is that I'm more familiar with Peterson than I am Zizek, mainly due to the fact that I've actually sat down and watched a good chunk of his content before. I've even seen him on other podcasts, and the most I can really say about Peterson is that he's basically just a school teacher who teaches mythology, as well as, you know, not just ideology, but also like he goes into deeper dissections of like the sort of like almost psychological sort of nature around those mythologies, why human beings created those mythologies, and among other things. At least those are his most popular lectures on the internet. Some have even go as far as to say that Jordan Peterson is kind of like a second father, and I don't know how to feel about that. Um, I wouldn't say that Peterson's like a second father, at least for me. The most I would say is that Peterson has a very unique look at certain, you know, like on different things. And while I don't agree with everything he's ever said, I do think that he has a lot of interesting opinions and points. And I've never really found anything that he's ever said to really be outright sort of like just questionable. The only thing I have saw that about Peterson that has made me kind of like stop and think for a second is when he talked about how, you know, like men have to essentially be monsters in order to actually, in order to progress through life, in a sense. And it's not like he's wrong. I just don't know if I would use the term monster. I mean, you certainly have to become a titan of sorts in order to get your life together and get shit done and kind of, bulldoze your way into places of actual, success among other things. But it's like, you don't want to be a monster. It's not something you want to do. But I also get that Peterson, I believe in one of those lectures, when he was talking about this particular subject, when he was talking about men needing to be monsters, he was also mentioning about, like, be careful about chasing monsters because, lest you become one yourself. He seems very self-aware about a lot of things. But I do think that there's some interesting discussions to be had. He's also a religious guy, from what I remember. He believes in God. He believes in, he has a strong faith in God, and among other things. He's a religious man. So I've known a few religious people before, and they're not. I don't know. They're not crazy. I know some people give religious people a bit of a bad rap because it's like, oh, you believe in God? Well, don't be throwing your religious beliefs down my throat. It's about the long and short of that subject, but it's all in all, like I find that most people who believe in God to be rather pretty chill. So, and plus, there's a lot of things in life that, happen and act, and it's just a lot of mysterious things that just tend to happen in life that just are, well, they're just mysterious. Like, I've had a friend of mine, a colleague at work, who tells me about interesting things that happen where he will go through life and he'll experience a strange anomaly, and then something unique would happen afterwards, or he would come up with, or he'll discover something unique as a result. It's a it's very fascinating how different the world is for some people, and how perspectives definitely color and shape our reality. But that is just that. Anyways, without further ado, let's just get back into it.
Both Dr. Zizek and Peterson transcend their titles, their disciplines, and the academy, just as this debate, we hope, will transcend purely economic questions by situating those in the frame of happiness, of human flourishing itself. We're in for quite a night. A quick word about format. Each of our debaters will have 30 minutes to make a substantial opening statement, to lay out an argument. Dr. Peterson first, followed by Dr. Zizek. Each will then have, in the same order, 10 minutes to reply. I will then moderate 45 minutes or so of questions, many of which will come from you, the audience, both here in Toronto and online. With that, let's get underway. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jordan Peterson for the first opening statement.
Well, thank you for that insanely enthusiastic welcome for the entire event, and also for being here. I have to tell you first that this event, and I suppose my life in some sense, hit a new milestone that I was just made aware of by a stagehand today.
Actually, hang on 1 second. Okay, sorry about that. I had no idea that my audio ducking was situated to where it would automatically lower the video sound, because I hadn't actually I haven't actually set it to where like it ducks in conjunction with my inputs versus my audio input versus the video audio input. So yeah, sorry about that. Anyways, you were probably getting smaller sound, like a much lower volume out of that than I was. So yeah, sorry about that. Anyways, I'm not sure where we were because I had to continue to play and replay the video in order to figure it out. So we're just back here. Anyways, moving on.
Well, thank you for that insanely enthusiastic welcome for the entire event, and also for being here. I have to tell you first that this event, and I suppose my life in some sense, hit a new milestone that I was just made aware of by a stagehand today backstage, who informed me that last week the tickets for this event were being scalped online at a higher price than the tickets for the Leafs playoff games. So I don't know what to make of that. All right, so how did I prepare for this? I familiarized myself to the degree that it was possible with Slavoj Zizek's work, and that wasn't that possible because he has a lot of work and he's a very original thinker, and this debate was put together in relatively short order. And what I did instead was return to what I regarded as the original cause of all the trouble, let's say, which was the Communist Manifesto. And what I attempted to do, because that's Marx, and we're here to talk about Marxism, let's say, and what I tried to do was read it. And to read something, you don't just follow the words and follow the meaning, but you take apart the sentences and you ask yourself at this level of phrase and at the level of sentence and at the level of paragraph, is this true? Are there counter arguments that can be put forward that are credible? Is this solid thinking? And I have to tell you, and I'm not trying to be flippant here, that I have rarely read a tract. Now, I read it when I was 18. It was a long time ago, right? That's 40 years ago. But I've rarely read a tract that made as many errors per sentence, conceptual errors per sentence, as the Communist Manifesto. It was quite a miraculous reread. It was interesting to think about it psychologically as well, because I've read student papers that were of the same ilk in some sense, although I'm not suggesting that they were of the same level of glittering literary brilliance and polemic quality. And I also understand that the Communist Manifesto was a call for revolution and not a standard logical argument. But that notwithstanding, I have some things to say about the authors psychologically. The first thing is that it doesn't seem to me that either Marx or Engels grappled with this particular fundamental truth, which is that almost all ideas are wrong. And so and it doesn't matter if they're your ideas or someone else's ideas, they're probably wrong. And even if they strike you with the force of brilliance, your job is to assume, first of all, that they're probably wrong, and then to assault them with everything you have in your arsenal and see if they can survive. And what struck me about the Communist Manifesto was it was akin to something Jung said about typical thinking. And this was the thinking of people who weren't trained to think. And he said that the typical thinker has a thought. It appears to them like an object might appear in a room. The thought appears, and then they just accept it as true. They don't go the second step, which is to think about the thinking. And that's the real essence of critical thinking. And so that's what you try to teach people in university, is to read a text and to think about it critically, not to destroy the utility of the text, but to separate the wheat from the chaff. And so
in other words, basically exercise common sense and don't just believe everything you're told, and actually listen and think about what they're actually saying and how that correlates to your life and your experiences and how truthful that actually is for you and not just to the person speaking it, which is it's a very simple, it's a very complicated, but it's a very self-explanatory thing that he's talking about. And it's something that he has talked about in the past, and rehearing it again, I'm like, yeah, that makes total sense. And honestly, people should be more questionable about things that they hear. I know that a lot of people are always flummoxed, especially the terminally online, about the fact that people don't just accept the scraps they're given, but it's just like, well, no, we should be thinking and questioning everything that we see and hear. We shouldn't just accept everything as fact, because otherwise, we get stupid shit like the nonsense that was the entire COVID situation. And I gotta tell you, there was a lot of things that came out of the COVID situation that I'm pretty sure a lot of us, when you really sit down and look into it, and hell, even if you're not even looking at that, looking at the things that have been going on with the dating market, and the kind of weird socio-political nonsense that's happening behind the scenes of like most high-profile celebrity cancellations, as well as just some of the shitty things people will do just to get a quick buck, is insane. It's absolutely insane. I mean, like, say what you want about other cases, but, the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard case was national, and let me tell you, it was something that I'm pretty sure a lot of people, including the people who actually believed and cared about the idea behind the Me Too movement, as a major fucking red flag for how the movement was going to go down going forward, because now the movement is kind of, it's non-existent. It's done. It's over. Like, people used to be in fear of being called out for being a sex pest, or among other things. And, some people rightly so, but it also had the ramifications of also destroying the lives of just normal everyday people. And there have been plenty of cases of just, average, normal, everyday Americans getting canceled for literally no other reason other than just because a woman didn't like a guy, so she made up some shit and basically destroyed this entire guy's life. and made it impossible for him to recover and, make it back into society, which is the equivalent of essentially just fucking killing him without actually killing him. And this is what I say. This is what I mean when I say that women are playing with fire, is that eventually, if they keep canceling people willy-nilly like this, eventually some stupid broad out there is going to cancel the wrong person. And all that's going to take, by the way, all it's going to take for just some guy who gets canceled to immediately do some stupid shit is the idea and thought that she just canceled me. I've been accused of being a potential struggle snuggler, and among other things, right? Now I have no job. Everyone hates me. My family's disowned me. And now I have nothing. What do I do? Or I'm about to. What do I do? All it takes is one guy to look at that resulting situation that's looming over the horizon or is happening in the current moment and just be like, well, if my life is going to be fucked up, this is going to be fucked up regardless. I can at least fuck hers up before it all goes to shit. What do you think that's going to look like? I'm curious. Any ladies in the comments section, all right? What do you think that's going to look like? If you think scorched earth policy looks terrifying from women, which is usually an unhinged level of psychological abuse, what do you think scorched earth is going to look like from men? And mind you, these are the builders of society, so what's the antithesis of being a builder? This is what I mean when I say you people are playing with fucking fire, okay? When you are out here and you're destroying people's lives because you think it's going to get you money, or because you think it's going to get you, like, the life you want, just without the need or, responsibility of helping to manage or take care of somebody else's life, being a partner, like any normal, good, healthy relationship should be, what do you think it's going to look like? What do you think it's going to look like? It just riddle me that one. I don't think you understand the implications of this dilemma. So yes, when I see women out here doing stupid shit like canceling someone just because he's an inconvenience, well, what's to stop him from being just the worst kind of inconvenience, which is the kind of person who does a little bit more than just unalives you? I want you to think about that the next time you think you're going to do something really fucking stupid, like cancel a dude's entire life and career. I just want you to consider that the next time you do that, because as of right now, guys are already aware and are practically avoiding women out, not just out of spite, but just out of pure professional courtesy, out of societal obligation. Imagine if one of these dudes just decide, you know what, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to get with a girl, and I'm just going to see if maybe she's going to be the one who isn't like that. I'm just going to see if she's going to be the one who actually cares about me and isn't just in it for my money, my looks, among other things, right? And then you do this shit, right? Now he's already aware that because of the resulting situation, there's no fucking question that his life is fucked. It's guaranteed. So what do you think he's gonna do? If he's just gonna potentially get, his life destroyed, and he's gonna be out in the streets or he's gonna be thrown into prison anyways, what's he gonna do? What's his resulting next decision gonna be? Well, if my life is fucked anyways, I don't see any problem with what I'm about to do next. All it takes is just one bad day, all right? The Killing Joke, all right, plays this out very clearly for all of you. All it takes is one bad day, and suddenly everything changes. All right, you want to create another Joker? You want to create another Batman villain? That's how you do it. It just takes one thing, one bad day, and suddenly everything changes. And if you think that's not scary, think about it like this, okay? Think about this situation from a different lens, okay? If I'm not going to get into this. I'm not going to get into this. I already said my piece. I can't do this. I can't rant because this is already a 2-hour long debate. I can't do it. So we're moving on.
I tried to do when I was reading the Communist Manifesto was to separate the wheat from the chaff. And I'm afraid I found some
This will probably be my longest video yet.
And I'm going to explain why, hopefully in relatively short order. So I'm going to outline 10 of the fundamental axioms of the Communist Manifesto. And so these are truths that are basically held as self-evident by the authors. And they're truths that are presented in some sense as unquestioned. And I'm going to question them and tell you why I think they're unreliable. Now, we should remember that this tract was actually written 170 years ago. That's a long time ago. And we have learned a fair bit from since then about human nature, about society, about politics, about economics. There's lots of mysteries left to be unsolved, but left to be solved, but we are slightly wiser, I presume, than we were at one point. And so you can forgive the authors to some degree for what they didn't know, but that doesn't matter given that the essence of this doctrine is still held as sacrosanct by a large proportion of academics, probably are among the most, what would you call, guilty of that particular sin. So here's proposition number one. History is to be viewed primarily as an economic class struggle. All right, so let's think about that for a minute. The first of all is the proposition there is that history is primarily to be viewed through an economic lens, and I think that's a debatable proposition because there are many other motivations that drive human beings than economics, and those have to be taken into account, especially that drive people other than economic competition, like economic cooperation, for example. And so that's a problem. The other problem is that it's actually not nearly a pessimistic enough description of the actual problem, because history, this is to give the devil his due. The idea that one of the driving forces between history is hierarchical struggle is absolutely true. But the idea that that's actually history is not true, because it's deeper than history. It's biology itself, because organisms of all sorts organize themselves into hierarchies. And one of the problems with hierarchies is that they tend to arrange themselves into a winner-take-all situation. And so, and that is implicit in some sense in Marx's thinking, because of course Marx believed that in a capitalist society, capital would accumulate in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And that actually is in keeping with the nature of hierarchical organizations. Now, the problem with that isn't so much the fact of so there's accuracy in the accusation that that is a eternal form of motivation for struggle, but it's an underestimation of the seriousness of the problem, because it attributes it to the structure of human societies rather than the deeper reality of the existence of hierarchical structures per se, which, as they also characterize the animal kingdom to a large degree, are clearly not only human constructions. And the idea that there's hierarchical competition among human beings, there's evidence for that that goes back at least to the Paleolithic times. And so that's the next problem. It's that, well, this ancient problem of hierarchical structure is clearly not attributable to capitalism, because it existed long in human history before capitalism existed, and then it predated human history itself. So the question then arises, why would you necessarily, at least implicitly, link the class struggle with capitalism, given that it's a far deeper problem? And now, it's also, you've got to understand that this is a deeper problem for people on the left, not just for people on the right. It is the case that hierarchical structures dispossess those people who are at the bottom, those creatures who are at the bottom, speaking, say, of animals, but those people who are at the bottom, and that is a fundamental existential problem. But the other thing that Marx didn't seem to take into account is that there are far more reasons that human beings struggle than their economic class struggle, even if you build the hierarchical idea into that, which is a more comprehensive way of thinking about it. Human beings struggle with themselves, with the malevolence that's inside themselves, with the evil that they're capable of doing, with the spiritual and psychological warfare that goes on within them. And we're also actually always at odds with nature. And this never seems to show up in Marx. And it doesn't show up in Marxism in general. It's as if nature doesn't exist. The primary conflict, as far as I'm concerned, or a primary conflict that human beings engage in, is the struggle for life in a cruel and harsh natural world. And it's as if that doesn't exist in the Marxist domain. If human beings have a problem, it's because there's a class struggle that's essentially economic. It's like, no, human beings have problems because we come into life starving and lonesome. And we have to solve that problem continually, and we make our social arrangements, at least in part, to ameliorate that, as well as to, well, upon occasion, exacerbate it. And so there's also very little understanding in the Communist Manifesto that any of the, like, say, hierarchical organizations that human beings have put together might have a positive element. And that's an absolute catastrophe, because hierarchical structures are actually necessary to solve complicated social problems. We have to organize ourselves in some manner, and you have to give the devil his due. And so it is the case that hierarchies dispossess people, and that's a big problem. That's the fundamental problem of inequality. But it's also the case that hierarchies happen to be a very efficient way of distributing resources. And it's finally the case that human hierarchies are not fundamentally predicated on power. And I would say the biological, anthropological data on that are crystal clear. You don't rise to a position of authority that's reliable in a human society primarily by exploiting other people. It's a very unstable means of obtaining power. So that's a problem.
I will say that he does make a great point about this. You can have a hierarchical structure without the displacement of lower class and middle class folks. It's not necessary, and it's liable to bite you in the ass at some point. The only people who seem to fail at understanding this are people who just don't give a shit. Like, here's a great example, because we just had a great example of this recently. The Luigi Mangione situation that's going on right now. He unalived a health insurance CEO. That wasn't the surprising part. At least not for me. Now, the very surprising part for me was that, he unalived he basically Minecrafted a health insurance CEO, right? A healthcare CEO. That wasn't the part that surprised me, so to speak, as like the build up leading up to it. Like, I kind of already had a good inkling that the healthcare industry was a bit of a shit show, right? Like, I always knew that Obamacare was a shit show, but I never truly knew just how fucking stupid the healthcare industry was until this incident. People would come out of the woodwork talking about their lives and how the healthcare industry has utterly and thoroughly fucked them because of their insatiable need for constantly maintaining their revenue. And it's basically a subscription service. Every health insurance company is basically a subscription service, but the difference is that those services exist so that way the buildup that you donate to that company eventually comes back to save you when you need it. And the interesting factor of it is that they're entirely incentive to not let you do that. And so their goal, and a friend of mine had explained this to me when he was talking about car insurance, when he worked in a car insurance firm, is that their goal is to essentially make it impossible for you to claim that insurance. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. But then this healthcare thing comes around, and I'm like, you know what? That seems pretty tragic, but I honestly couldn't care. A CEO died. Who cares, right? No, it gets even worse than that because he was the CEO of one of the worst fucking healthcare companies of the whole lot. And not only that, but these companies will literally murder people by denying them claims to their medicines. They will literally, I've seen videos of this by now. They people will literally will even doctors will fucking berate and yell at these insurance companies to give these people the life-saving medicines and surgeries and among other things that they need in order to maintain their existence and to be able to go about their normal everyday lives, to be able to have the necessary procedures and health care that they need in order to properly live as a human being, and they're just denying the shit. And it's just like, what the fuck? I made an interesting jab about this in my shoe on head video, the one that's sitting at 3,000 views by now. Which by the way, thank you all again so much for supporting me in that video. But I made a jab at the healthcare industry slightly when my own insurance company said, "I'm going to deny your claim for health because this one dental thing that you did was not covered by our plan." And I'm like, well, shit, if you're not going to cover it, why the fuck do I even have you? Turns out a lot of people feel like this. A lot of people feel like that. Only this wasn't a situation where I'm in such a dire need of the healthcare, and it was something that was such a non-issue that I just was like, fine, I'll pay it in full, but fuck you. Just fuck you. Fine, I'll do it. But it's just, imagine doing this to someone who needs that medication, who needs that surgery in order to live their lives. It's like, how can you say no to people whose lives will be fundamentally changed or guaranteed to fucking wither and die if they don't get this one thing done in order to change it all? And it's like, and even then, it may not even be the one thing. It could be a process, but this is what the healthcare system is supposed to be about. And when I realized this, I thought to myself, I gotta make this short, but when I realized this, I was like, you know what? That's pretty fucked. And the response by the general public was pretty appropriate, if you ask me. Was pretty appropriate. I don't give a shit. Who cares? Oh, so a CEO of a company died? Oh, well, that's sad. Oh, it was a health insurance company? Oh, well, fuck those people. Like, you expect people to care. You really expect normal, everyday people who get fucked over by these companies day in and day out to actually give a shit about one of their fucking own, and not even just like a bottom tier worker who has to actually deny these people on the daily. Not someone who has to listen to all the phone calls, who gets berated constantly, and has to deal with the growing dissemination. I don't even know that's the appropriate word. Basically, all of the bells and whistles of basically working working in the healthcare industry. And no, it's not that guy, but it's the guy in charge who basically decides how things get done. Yeah, I don't see a problem here. You know what's even funnier is that immediately after this, you started seeing wanted posters in New York, all over New York, of the CEOs of other healthcare companies, with their full names and their positions in which company, and among other things, right? You got to see full details, and they were on wanted posters, literal wanted posters, all across the city of New York, on just the walls of buildings across, like a bunch of streets somewhere in like some part of New York. And it's just like, you know, that seems pretty terrifying. I would not want to be a healthcare CEO at this current juncture. But you know what their response was? Their response wasn't like, "Oh, let's just change our ways then. We should probably consider maybe actually giving a shit about the people we are responsible for providing the necessary aid and health insurance that they need in order to go about, to basically recover and to live proper, peaceful lives, No, 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 no. Their response was to go into hiding, bump up their security, and wipe all of their names and families out of the public records. And you expect people to care about these guys? Why? Just out of curiosity. You expect people to care about these people? Why? Their response wasn't to, you know what, we're going to do better. We're going to change our ways. We're going to give people the help that they need. No, 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 no. It's let's fucking go into hiding and not do a goddamn thing. I'm sorry. No. I have no sympathy for you. You people are fucking monsters. I don't care if anything happens. All right, all right. And I'm pretty sure I speak for a lot of people when I say that I'm pretty sure most people will feel the exact same way. Is it sad? Sure. Does it somehow excuse the fact that there isn't going to be a father at the next Thanksgiving feast or the next family dinner, among other things, or the next holidays, seasons, as well as birthdays and like weddings, among other things, as well as childhood milestones? You is that going to be does that excuse all of that? No, of course not. But do you think it was earned? Maybe. I'm not even going to say that, but I am going to say that you reap what you sow. And people tend to create their own monsters. If you think this one incident was a bit of a wake-up call for these people, well, apparently it wasn't. Because their response to it was immediately dip and go into hiding. Apparently, these people need to be reminded that people are a thing, they do exist, and when they're basically being mistreated, they're going to get up to some fuck shit. And and remember what I said earlier about women playing with fire? Well, these healthcare CEOs are playing with fire. These healthcare companies are playing with fire. What's their response? We're just gonna go into hiding and just possibly double down on our nefarious practices? Yeah, no. Yeah, no. Let's see how long that fucking lasts. I guarantee you that if things don't get better, and if there's enough disgruntled health insurance people who need that health insurance, if there's enough disgruntled folk out there who likely need that life-saving medications, who are tired of being stonewalled by these health insurance companies, and they decide to take matters into their own hands, they only have themselves to blame. They had this one warning, this one incident to basically tell them we need to change our ways. And since they're not going to do that, you can't really expect people to feel sorry for you when the one warning you got was literally losing one of your own, and then the potential risk of having one of you people and your families basically being targeted, being on the table. That is entirely on you. This goes from like shame on you to no to shame on me, because you cannot do this shit, all right? It's one thing that you fool the people who you are supposed to be giving this healthcare for. It's another thing when something stupid happens, something really awful happens, and then your response to that isn't to solve it, it's to double down on it and go into hiding. That's literally just like, oh, well, no, shame on you now. It goes from shame on you to shame on me behavior, because it's literally like you were given one warning, and you're fucking it. You're absolutely fucking it. So no, I have no qualms nor care that you will probably face some type of repercussion. I went on a bit of a tangent. It's too long. Let's just move on.
Well, the people that laugh might do it that way. Okay, now another problem that comes up right away is that Marx also assumes that you can think about history as a binary class struggle, with clear divisions between, say, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. And that's actually a problem, because it's not so easy to make a firm division between who's exploiter and who's exploitee, let's say, because it's not obvious, like in the case of small shareholders, let's say, whether or not they happen to be part of the oppressed or part of the oppressor. This actually turned out to be a big problem in the Russian Revolution. And by big problem, I mean tremendously big problem. Because it turned out that you could fragment people into multiple identities, and that's a fairly easy thing to do. And you could usually find some axis along which they were part of the oppressor class. It might have been a consequence of their education, or it might have been a consequence of the wealth that they strived to accumulate during their life, or it might have been a consequence of the fact that they had parents or grandparents who were educated or rich, or that they were a member of the priesthood, or that they were socialists, or anyways, the listing of how it was possible for you to be bourgeois instead of proletariat grew immensely, and that was one of the reasons that the Red Terror claimed all the victims that it claimed. And so that was a huge problem. It was probably most exemplified by the demolition of the kulaks, who were basically peasant farmers, although effective ones in the Soviet Union, who had managed to raise themselves out of serfdom over a period of about 40 years and to gather some degree of material security about them. And about 1.8 million of them
I think
were
about putting
exiled.
on captions.
400,000 were killed, and the net consequence of that removal of their private property because of their bourgeois status was arguably the death of 6 million Ukrainians in the famines of the 1930s. And so the binary class struggle idea, that was a bad idea. That was a very, very bad idea. It's also bad in this way, and this is a real sleight of hand that Marx pulls off, is you have a binary class division, proletariat and bourgeoisie, and you have an implicit idea that all of the good is on the side of the proletariat and all of the evil is on the side of the bourgeoisie. And that's classic group identity thinking. You know, it's one of the reasons I don't like identity politics, is because once you divide people into groups and pit them against one another, it's very easy to assume that all the evil in the world can be attributed to one group, the hypothetical oppressors, and all the good to the other. And that, well, and that's naive. That's naive beyond comprehension, because it's absolutely foolish to make the presumption that you can identify someone's moral worth with their economic standing. So, and that actually turned out to be a real problem as well.
I mean, that's a pretty good point when you get down to it, because there's a lot of idiots who exercise this identity politic level thinking, and it's not even in the sense of like, in terms of like the status of a person. It's more so just in the terms of like, oh, well, you're clearly a part of the privileged class, so clearly you know, like, aren't deserving of certain rewards or certain educations, or you're not given nearly the same level of treatment as, you know, some others. And it's mostly due to the fact that they want to give somebody else this idea that they need to give someone else the opportunity to essentially be the kind of person that they need to be in order to be functioning members of society. And while I can understand the hustle in that idea, I don't agree with it just based off the principle that I think that the right people should be in charge in every situation, and not just the people you think should be in charge simply because of skin color, just ethnicity, sex, and among other things, right? We don't, and well, I've already pointed this out in my other videos. There is no point to this thinking that isn't going to somehow backfire, because when you get down to it, the question of how did you get here and why are you here is going to slap the face of everyone who achieves that objective. And it's going to come back and bite everyone in the ass, because it's going to make everything invalidated just by the pure principle of the fact that people got into a position where they now have a job and the ability to, get work and obtain a sustainable living in a position that somebody else who's probably more qualified could have gotten, but you got it anyways because of your particular type of ethnic privilege. It's like you this is why this ideological thinking of needing to, you know, to base everything on race and sex is so flawed. It's because it's going to create the inverse problem. It's going to create the inverse problem of like, why did you get of like, oh, we need to get more diverse groups of people in positions of work and sustainable living. Okay, let's do that. How are we going to do that? We'll just fucking give it to them. We'll hand it to them on a silver platter, even if we think that they're not, even if we think they're somewhat qualified or not qualified at all for the position. It's like, oh, well, fucking great, outstanding, get to it. It's like you can't expect this to work. It's not going to work, and it's not going to be sustainable for very long, especially when it comes down to brass tacks. When it comes down to brass tacks, if there's one weak cog in the entire system, everything's going to hinge on whether or not that cog is going to be able to do its job. All right? You're only as strong as your weakest link. And if that link is pretty goddamn pathetic, it's gonna snap and it's gonna make everything come to a halt. Because somebody needs to do the job, and depending on what position that is, that's gonna be a very fucking important thing that needs doing. I don't know how else to tell you this. I don't know how else to say this, but a lot of this stuff is gonna come back and bite people in the ass, and it's gonna come back in the sense of, wait, you mean you only got hired because of X, Y, and Z? And not because you're actually qualified? That's kind of fucked up. And they're probably going to agree with that sentiment as well. That is kind of fucked up. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be like, how come you hired me for this? This is actually illegal. And they're just like, what do you mean? But you benefited from this. I mean, like, you got a job here. Aren't you grateful? And it's like, I would be grateful if I got the job legitimately. But I didn't. You hired me because of a specific thing that I possess that most people do not, which is either due to race or gender. And it does not matter. Hell, sometimes sexual orientation. It's like that you people do not understand this. This is why I hate Twitter and why I hate social media and the internet at large. It's because there's a lot of brainlets on the internet, and they cannot fathom the idea, the concept, the possible notion that the ideas that they espouse could possibly fucking fail, despite the fact that there is very clear and critical lapse in failure of these mental gymnastics that they are performing, and they do not want to address it. Absolutely not. Could not be bothered to address it. And they will call you an Islamophobe for even bothering to question it. And you expect me to care about these people. You expect me to actually give a shit about these ideas and these problems in this sense. Are you fucking serious? If you want to get people of color and you want to get more women into STEM, fucking educate the people who want to do those things. And if the majority of people do not want, of those specific demographics, don't want to do those things, that is their choice. That is their choice. Most women would prefer to go into a profession involving beauty and fashion anyways. If given the choice, they would rather do anything else other than high-profile and highly sophisticated and highly skilled positions. They would rather do anything else. And if you were to ask other demographics or ethnicities, would you like to have these positions or do other things? They probably would do other things. I've met more African Americans who would rather be artists, such as like singers, songwriters, or, literal fucking artists that draw comics or something like that, rather than be professional doctors or scientists or the next politician, the next president of the United States, or the next person to go into space. A lot of these people would rather do anything else. I have met more people who would rather be songwriters would rather be artists in the form of music, so in terms of sound, or just straight up drawing and graphic design. I don't I don't know what else to tell you. I don't know what else to tell you other than the demographics. You want these demographics, but the demographics don't want these things either. So where are you? So what are you left with? Oh, the only people who seem to give a shit. And who are the people who are these people who seem to give a shit majoritively of the time? Well, apparently it's going to be crusty old white dudes. I don't know how else to tell you this. I don't know how to break it to you better than that, other than the majority of people who seem to be in positions of influence, power, and intelligence and wisdom are usually old, crusty abominations. I don't know what else to tell you. I can't tell you anything else other than this because it's true. You look in Congress, what do you see? A bunch of old people of different ethnicities and colors sometimes, but it's majoritively of the time it's a sea of Caucasian. I don't know how to break it to you. It's just how it is. Apparently, the generation that actually gave a shit still kind of gives a shit about the country. Just happened to be old and white. Granted, we have some new blood in there, but the new blood is very fucking radicalized and are honestly insufferable. Like, I cannot tell you the amount of times I would rather have a fucking crazy person in office who also happens to be fairly old be in the position of running things and doing things than some young buck who just got out of college and thinks they know what's up. All right? I was a young buck who just got out of high school and thought he knew what was up, and then I realized pretty fucking quickly that life does not work the way I think it does. And in fact, I learned it I had a pretty good inkling of this back in high school, and I recognized that, and I'm like, maybe I'm going to change the way I think of things, and I did, and if I had been the person that I was at the beginning of high school, going out into the world as I have been so far, I would have gotten a major culture shock. Major. It would have been I would not have been prepared nearly as well as I was when I got out of high school, going into a new state, a new life, and basically starting over sort of with my folks. And it was like, and it is such a different ball game from school. And school does not prepare you for any of that shit, especially not California. Fuck California. You think the fucking, what was it, the CSAT? I don't remember. The California Standard Education System is garbage. I don't know how to break it to anybody other than that. You know, at this rate, I might just cut this video into parts because clearly I'm gonna ramble. And I don't know how else to fucking fix that other than the fact that I'm just gonna have to cut this into parts. So, yeah, you'll get the first 3-hour version of this rant, and then the rest of it, I'm only going to do it in 2 parts. So, without further ado, let's just get back into it. I'll even rewind a little bit.
That's naive beyond comprehension, because it's absolutely foolish to make the presumption that you can identify someone's moral worth with their economic standing. So, and that actually turned out to be a real problem as well, because Marx also came up with this idea, which is a crazy idea as far as I can tell, that's a technical term, crazy idea, of the dictatorship of the proletariat. And that's the next idea that I really stumbled across. It was like, okay, so what's the problem? Well, the problem is the capitalists own everything. They own all the means of production, and they're oppressing everyone. And that would be all the workers. And there's going to be a race to the bottom of wages for the workers as the capitalists strive to extract more and more value from the labor of the proletariat by competing with other capitalists to drive wages downward, which, by the way, didn't happen, partly because wage earners can become scarce, and that actually drives the market value upward. But the fact that you assume a priori that all the evil can be attributed to the capitalists and all the good, the bourgeoisie, and all the good could be attributed to the proletariat meant that you could hypothesize that a dictatorship of the proletariat could come about. And that was the first stage in the communist revolution. And remember, this is a call for revolution, and not just revolution, but bloody, violent revolution, and the overthrowing of all existent social structures. Anyways, the problem with that, you see, is that because all the evil isn't divided so easily up into oppressor and oppressed, that when you do establish a dictator of the proletariat, to the degree that you can do that, which you actually can't because it's technically impossible and an absurd thing to consider to begin with, not least because of the problem of centralization. I mean, you have to hypothesize that you can take away all the property of the capitalists. You can replace the capitalist class with a minority of proletariats. How they're going to be chosen isn't exactly clear in the Communist Manifesto. But none of the people who are from the proletariat class are going to be corrupted by that sudden access to power because they're, well, by definition, good. So then you have the good people who are running the world, and you also have them centralized so that they can make decisions that are insanely complicated to make, in fact, impossibly complicated to make. And so that's a failure conceptually on both dimensions because, first of all the proletariat aren't going to be good. And when you put people in the same position as the evil capitalists, especially if you believe that social pressure is one of the determining factors of human character, which the Marxists certainly believe, then why wouldn't you assume that the proletariat would immediately become as or more corrupt than the capitalists, which is, of course, I would say exactly what happened every time this experiment was run. And then...
Well, yeah, that's why you don't give people power too quickly, and that we should leave the decision of who gets the power to people who are truly deserving of it. You know, there's a reason why we hold people accountable for things, and it's because if they don't display a level of ethics and morals that is indicative to the culture from which they stem from, they are not worthy of being in positions of power or influence, and certainly not decent functioning members of society. You know, prisons exist for a reason. Well, you don't want murderers and people that I can't say on YouTube going around doing terrible things to people, because that goes against every moral and ethical, standing that exists in the country. So we can't have that. And so if we can agree on this particular issue, then it only makes sense that we should exercise a level of weeding out the chaff from the people who are worth actually taking in, and we should have places and areas where we can determine the value of a person based off of their substantial talent and skill, as well as their ethical and moral definition and character. Because if we don't do that, then we're gonna get these situations where we have people who honestly should not be in possession of power to suddenly be in possession of power, and they basically run away with it and they do whatever the fuck they want with it. We can't have that, but we allow it to happen anyways. And the people in charge, who are also like-minded in this sense, will collude together to make sure that their way of doing things continue to persist even after they're gone. Because, they will always hire and they will always look for people who think and act exactly as they do. And so if everyone is a corrupt politician, then no one is. And so if we have a corrupt system as a result of having too many corrupt individuals in positions of power and influence, what do? Well, revolutions tend to happen, and we haven't gotten to the point to where things have gotten out of hand that we need revolutions, but we're pretty damn close to it. And so if people aren't fucking careful about the next things that they decide to do that's going to negatively detract from the populace, well, congratulations, you're gonna have a fucking revolution on your hands. And I don't know how to break it to you, but just about every American has a possession of a gun, and so does your armies. And I'm pretty fucking sure in order to replenish your armies, you're going to need a populace who's going to want to join it. And I don't know if you remember how the last Civil War happened, but, that wasn't fun for anyone. Not even the people who rebelled. Certainly not the establishment. So yes, for the love of fucking God, please, for God's sake, make better decisions. Please. And I certainly do not want to be drafted into whatever war is going to come as a result of stupid decisions. Because let me fucking tell you, the things that our military is capable of now, that likely other militaries are capable of today, as well, will utterly fucking destroy us. You could die in ways you never thought possible now. And I don't want to be on the front lines on that shit. You can go fuck yourself on that.
The next problem is, well, what makes you think that you can take some system as complicated as like capitalist free market society and centralize that and put decision-making power in the hands of a few people, the mechanisms by...
Okay, that was weird.
Without specifying the mechanisms by which you're going to choose them. Like, what makes you think they're going to have the wisdom or the ability to do what the capitalists were doing, unless you assume...
How come his voice keeps doing that? Okay, whatever.
As Marx did, that all of the evil was with the capitalists and all the good was with the proletariats, and that nothing that capitalists did constituted valid labor, which is another thing that Marx assumed, which is palpably absurd, because people who are, like maybe if you're a dissolute aristocrat from 1830 or earlier, and you run a feudal estate and all you do is spend your time gambling and chasing prostitutes, well, then your labor value is zero. But if you're running a business and it's a successful business, first of all, you're a bloody fool to exploit your workers, because even if you're greedy as sin, because you're not going to extract the maximum amount of labor out of them by doing that. And the notion that you're adding no productive value as a manager rather than a capitalist it's absolutely absurd. All it does is indicate that you either know nothing whatsoever about how an actual business works, or you refuse to know anything about how an actual business works. So that's also a big problem. So then the next problem is the criticism of profit. It's like, well, what's wrong with profit exactly? What's the problem with profit? Well, the idea from the Marxist perspective was that profit was theft. But profit, well, can be theft because crooked people can run companies, and so sometimes profit is theft, but that certainly doesn't mean that it's always theft. What it means, in part at least, if the capitalist is adding value to the corporation, then there's some utility and some fairness in him or her extracting the value of their abstract labor, their thought, their abstract abilities, their ability to manage the company, and to engage in proper competition and product development and efficiency and the proper treatment of the workers and all of that. And then if they can create a profit, well, then they have a little bit of security for times that aren't so good, and that seems absolutely bloody necessary as far as I'm concerned. And then the next thing is, well, how can you grow if you don't have a profit? And if you have an enterprise that's valuable and worthwhile, and some enterprises are valuable and worthwhile, then it seems to me that a little bit of profit to help you grow seems to be the right approach. And then the other issue with profit, and you know this if you've ever run a business, is it's really useful constraint. Like it's not enough to have a good idea. It's not enough to have a good idea and a sales and marketing plan, and then to implement that. And all of that, that's bloody difficult. Like, it's not easy to have a good idea. And it's not easy to come up with a good sales and marketing plan. And it's not easy to find customers and satisfy them. And so if you allow profit to constitute a limitation on what it is that you might reasonably attempt, it provides a good constraint on wasted labor. And so most of the things that I've done in my life, even psychologically, that were designed to help people's psychological health, I tried to run on a for-profit basis. And the reason for what that was, apart from the fact that I'm not averse to making a profit, partly so my enterprises can grow, but was also so that there were forms of stupidity that I couldn't engage in because I would be punished by the market enough to eradicate the enterprise. And so
I mean, it depends on the stupidity, right? It very much depends on the stupidity. Um, sometimes, especially nowadays, the market itself seems to create its own stupidity as well. So, you have to kind of, vet your sources, vet your allies, your benefactors, your your producers, your sponsors. You have to vet these people because any one of these people can fuck you. It it's not even a question, it's just a fact now. Any one of these people are liable to fuck you. And if you don't do your due diligence, you're doomed to make the same mistakes that everybody else has made. Just look at AAA video games right now. They keep making the same mistake of hiring people like Anita Sarkeesian into positions of influence in order to make games that honestly nobody wants and nobody cares about. And you would have been much better off introducing these elements in ways that were more organic to begin with. So, why in God's green earth would you continue to hire these people? Well, it's simple, really. It's because you're absolutely and positively retarded. I probably shouldn't use strong gamer words too hard in any video on YouTube, but it's just a fact. For some reason, companies exercise an idiotic mentality where they feel they have to make the same decision. It's, have you ever heard the definition of insanity? It's, God, that quote is truly something else. And it's Ubisoft that made the character who coined it. There is nothing more ironic than the fact that Ubisoft made the character from which they are currently suffering from the absolute illness that is that statement alone. Fuck. Anyways, like I'm saying, you keep making the same mistakes over and over again and expecting a different result. This same pattern keeps repeating itself over and over again. Like, hell, I did a reaction to the Witcher trailer, and I was seeing the discourse around the Witcher trailer, and I didn't even think about it from that lens. I was more so dissecting the fact that, why would you make this decision? Why would you do this? Why would you make Ciri into a Witcher, among other things? I was looking at it from a perspective as, like, a fan of The Witcher, and not really so much from the perspective of, like, the average everyday consumer, that it's just like, oh, pattern recognized. We got a game with a strong, insufferable female protagonist, and now we have another game with a strong, insufferable female protagonist, only this time she replaces the main character from which the franchise is based off of. So we have a gender swap, we have a strong female protagonist who's clearly full of herself. This clearly signals to every fiber of the customer's being that this is going to be another fucking game that's going to try to bother to lecture me and tell me how to think, and is going to be a writing fucking it's gonna be a writing natural disaster. And I didn't even consider that. I didn't even think of that. And now when I sit here and I think to myself, boy, did CD Projekt fuck it. Boy, did they fuck it. Boy, did they fuck it. It's like, I didn't even think of that. There's a pattern here that is very similar to other things that we've seen in the market so far, and the normal everyday consumer is pretty sick of this shit by now. What do they see when they look at this trailer? Holy shit. I didn't even think about it from that perspective. And I was kicking myself too, because I was like, oh man, I made an entire video just dissecting the trailer, talking about things that were related to lore and character related shit, not even focusing on this aspect because I didn't even think of that aspect. It's like, and I was so shocked by this. But you see but you see where this is all leading up to. These companies keep making the same mistake, and they do it because they think it's going to allow them to get the most amount of profit. It's not going to get them the most amount of profit because they've already fucked it enough times to where this simple idea of putting a female in a leading role, making her strong and full of herself, combined with the fact that it's an established franchise that originally had a male protagonist, equates to this is going to be hot garbage. This is going to be a fucking dumpster fire. And even just removing that last bit, these are still the hallmarks of a potential dumpster fire. People are going to not want to touch this with a 10-foot pole, not until at least reviews hit the market, in which case they might consider it. But it's still going to put a majority of people off. And the people who don't engage in the culture war, who don't engage in the possible quandary that is the gaming industry and its terrible, terrible business sense and business practices, they're going to look at this trailer. The average, normal, everyday consumer is going to look at that trailer, that Witcher 4 trailer, and they're going to think to themselves, this is just going to be another game that I know is going to be hot garbage, and I'm not going to touch it. And they're just going to go about their day. And that's going to be such a critical kick to the nads for CD. And you know what's even funnier? Is that it couldn't have happened at a worse time, but a few days, maybe a week after that trailer hits, suddenly one of the fucking developers gets hit with a fucking controversy because they apparently purportedly said on social media that they would absolutely love to punch a gamers in the face over some stupid shit. And it's like, this is why we have social media managers, and this is why if you're a part of a company, and if I had my own company, I would not let any of my employees to make any social media comments that wasn't vetted by our managers. And if they were going to say anything, it would be anything that is completely unrelated to our job, our customers, and our business model. And anyone who infringes on that and breaks it is liable to get fired. I will make that a strong fucking point. You say anything about our company, its customers, its business practice, you're liable to getting axed. Because we cannot deal with this shit right now. We cannot have this shit right now because no one can be responsible for themselves on social media. People treat social media like Twitter, like Facebook, like TikTok, like it's their own interpersonal thought bubble. Nobody gives the slightest fuck about what you people ate for dinner last night. Nobody gives a shit about what you did the previous day or what you ate just this morning. Nobody cares. The only thing people give a shit about, if you are a professional in any capacity, is what you are doing right now in terms of your business, and also what are some of the things you are doing with your, what are the things you're hoping to do in the future? Those are the only things. And also, just, keeping in contact and keeping up to date with your folks. That's the only thing social media should be used for, is keeping up to date with everyone in your friend circle, in your family circle, and as well as only fucking talking about the things that people who probably have a passing interest in you as a person might be doing professionally at this current moment, and what you might be doing in the future. Those are the only qualifiers. These should be the only things social media should be focused on, but but that's not what social media does. And nobody treats social media like this. I feel like that it's such a stupid fucking thing that we live in a world and a society where they have yet to figure out the most basic things of how they should organize shit. And I I don't think of myself as someone who is particularly smart or sophisticated enough to be able to do certain things, but I feel like that if I had to come up with an idea of how to run something, I feel like common sense would dictate that I would first begin by eliminating a lot of the major issues that are crippling the things that are plaguing our society and the problems that, are very pronounced within it. If I was to dictate how social media should be run, that would be one of the ways that I would do that. Would be if I was, like, let's say I was Elon, I would dictate how X is run by making it only to where people can stay in contact with their family members. They would have to actively look for and search for their family members, friend them, or add them into their family friend group, whatever the fuck, and then that would be it. They wouldn't be able to see any posts other than the people that they know, and they would only be able to follow people simply by looking them up. Like if they're aware of somebody and they know somebody because they might be a famous person or otherwise, or they happen to be a popular influencer on places like YouTube or Twitch or some other places, like go look them up on social media if they have a social media account. If you find them, follow them. There you go. That's how people should treat this shit. I know this is probably liable to create echo chambers, certainly, but at least this way it's a far better system, and it also helps to keep people from saying and doing stupid shit online, as well as minimizing a lot of the casualties and crossfires that come from people saying stupid shit on the internet, and then a flame war starts, and suddenly everyone is fair game, and anyone who gets caught in the crossfire basically gets their life ruined, basically gets harassed by complete strangers for no fucking reason whatsoever. And it has this residual effect going forward where suddenly anyone connected to this whole thing not only gets their lives ruined, but then their families get involved. You have people constantly bitching and whining to them and all these other things. Like people stalk your house, people stalk your family's house, like among other stupid shit. And they even call up your businesses and place of work, and they're just like, are you aware that your employee said this thing online? Does that not bother you? Shouldn't that not be a moral concern of yours? And it's just like, if we make social media to where only family members and close friends and relatives, or just friends in general, have the ability to access and also take account of other people in their family and in their friend groups, it would be a much different experience. Discord is a great example of this because Discord is basically a place where you can find your friends, you could talk with your friends, you could also build a group and a fucking an entire group and server dedicated to you and your friends and your ability to hang out among other things. And I feel like you could do the exact same shit with your business, with your schools, and all of your faculty members, as well as the students, and you could have it all organized the same way that Discord does it. And you could do all of these things. Essentially, I guess I'm arguing that every social media platform should be Discord, but I guess that's not necessarily the best decision, certainly. I'm probably overthinking this, and I'm probably not thinking hard enough about other potential things that you could possibly do to these platforms to make them more fucking substantially better. I'm just spitballing, and I'm just telling you things that I'm thinking of at the top of my head that would probably be far better for these platforms just by itself than anything else. Anyways, I'm moving on.
Enterprises can grow, but was also so that there were forms of stupidity that I couldn't engage in because I would be punished by the market enough to eradicate the enterprise. And so Okay, and then so the next issue, this is a weird one. So Marx and Engels also assume that this dictatorship of the proletariat, which involves absurd centralization, the overwhelming probability of corruption, and impossible computation, as the proletariat now try to rationally compute the manner in which an entire market economy could run, which cannot be done because it's far too complicated for anybody to think through. The next theory is that somehow the proletariat dictatorship would become magically hyperproductive. And there's actually no theory at all about how that's going to happen. And so I had to infer the theory, and the theory seems to be that once you eradicate the bourgeoisie, because they're evil, and you get rid of their private property, and you eradicate the profit motive, then all of a sudden, magically, the small percentage of the proletariat who now run the society determine how they can make their productive enterprises productive enough so they become hyperproductive. Now, and they need to become hyperproductive for the last error to be logically coherent in relationship to the Marxist theory, which is that at some point the proletariat, the dictatorship of the proletariat, will become so hyperproductive that there'll be enough material goods for everyone across all dimensions. And when that happens, then what people will do is spontaneously engage in meaningful creative labor, which is what they had been alienated from in the capitalist horror show, and the utopia will be magically ushered in. But there's no indication about how that hyperproductivity is going to come about, and there's also no understanding that, well, that isn't the utopia that is going to suit everyone, because there are great differences between people. And some people are going to find what they want in love, and some are going to find it in social being, and some are going to find it in conflict and competition, and some are going to find it in creativity, as Marx pointed out. But the notion that will necessarily be the end goal for the utopian state is preposterous. And then there's the Dostoevskian observation too, which is one not to be taken lightly, which is, well, what sort of shallow conception of people do you have that makes you think that if you gave people enough bread and cake, in the Dostoevskian terms, and nothing to do with except to busy themselves with the continuity of the species, that they would all of a sudden become peaceful and heavenly? Dostoevsky's idea was that, we were built for trouble. And if we were ever handed everything we needed on a silver platter, the first thing we would do is engage in some form of creative destruction, just so something unexpected could happen, just so we could have the adventure of our lives. And
I don't think there's any fucking piece of entertainment that really destroys this idea better than Warhammer. Warhammer 40k has an interesting story about the Eldar, which is the elven species of 40k. Their society had advanced so fast, so vastly, so preposterously amazingly, so greatly, that they basically had nuked any and all possible issues from existence. What did they do with that? What did they do with this newfound freedom to be able to essentially rest on their laurels? What did they do with all this free time that they suddenly had? Now that food is just as simple as snapping your fingers, and anything could be done just by just thinking about it, or just by simply doing it, and then it just be as simple as maybe doing something like pressing a button. Who knows? When everything has been done, when everything has been done and dusted, when every perceivable problem is just not even a factor, what do? Well, the Eldar found an answer to that, and it's similar to what Jordan Peterson was stating, which is that they created a problem that then exploded into something else, so that way they could have an adventure of their lives. Again, going back to what Bricky was saying, not to quote him word for word, but, they started, pretty harmlessly enough. They decided to get more in tune with their culture. They started to get into the arts. They started to really delve into what they could possibly do to further their species culture and redefine things that they've never questioned before. Maybe think of new ideas, new thoughts, new perspectives. And then they went from challenging themselves in their art to then engaging in other things, such as maybe even going to do what they're doing right now, which is ideological warfare and debates. And then we went from that to then, well, what's another thing that we could possibly do? Oh, well, we have a lot of free time. There isn't a whole lot of challenge. What's something we can do? Oh, let's engage in another aspect that of our lives that is hardly ever talked about or was really necessary until just now. Pleasure. How do we get the feelings, the sensations churning? Oh, I know. Let's just create entertainment. They probably created their own version of a video game before, or they've created their own games that are stimulating and very engrossing. But what about their need for procreation? Well, what if they found a way to mix the art and sex together? Well, there you go. That's they started doing that. And then what happens when they go from that to then saying, you know what? Playing games, having a lot of free time, engaging in debauchery, among other things. This is all really great and all, but I'm just not feeling it anymore. It's like, what do I do? Where do we go from here? Oh, let's just start murdering people. That sounds like a great idea. So they started killing each other, and they started combining the murder with the sex and violence, and they began to turn that into art. And then before long, they just started engaging in such high levels of just utter self-destructive behavior that the Eldar just essentially created a new chaos god from the precipice of the death of their own fucking culture, ego, and just, well, I don't actually know if their ego truly died. It's more like it malformed and changed into something else entirely, but you get where this is going, right? Slaanesh in 40K only exists because the Eldar dared to question, what if we just got even further fucked up? And they did. And so 40K has an interesting answer to this. When you have a lot of free time and nothing to do about it, you start to, you start to find yourself going down roads and rabbit holes and places that you normally wouldn't have thought about doing before, but because you're just bored enough, you're just gonna do it anyways, just to get a rise out of something, right? Just to experience something, to feel something. It's not enough to have maybe a job that you might like or might not like, be able to make art, to be able to write stories, to make works of entertainment for the populace that people like. No. It takes a truly sophisticated mind, a truly fucking unhinged and ridiculous state of being. What it really does is that it takes a significant level of apathy to take place for people to suddenly sit there and think to themselves, what I could really go for right now? Not a decent life, not food, not good food because I've already had enough good food. Not a decent, not sex because I've already had enough sex with my wife and it's all right, but it's not. Nothing challenges me anymore. Nothing feels good anymore. It's like everything just feels meh. How do I make things feel great again? How do I make life more interesting? And then they start to think about it. And then they realize, well, I could engage in some level of fucking debauchery to make it seem just a little bit more interesting. This mentality, the problem with the Eldar is that it was like you ever heard of the frog and the boiling pot of water effect? It's basically you take a frog, you throw it into a pot of boiling water, and you don't boil it immediately, but you basically you basically start off with like room temperature water. You throw the frog in it, and then you put that thing on simmer, and you just let it just slowly climb up in temperature and build up over time until eventually it starts to boil. But because the frog has been in the water as it's been slowly simmering into a boil, it doesn't really feel the immediate change in temperature, and so you slowly but surely boil the fucking frog to death, and it dies not even understanding or realizing that it has been boiling the whole time. And it's the same mentality. The Eldar had completely fucked themselves because they slowly burned themselves on sex, violence, and likely drugs too. That's another factor I didn't consider, is that they probably got hopped up in all manner of drugs. They just got into so much debauchery and excess that they literally became something totally different from the highly respectable and truly awe-inspiring elves that they probably were at the height and at the pinnacle of their power. And as a result, the entire Eldar race ended. Slaanesh was born, and now the last remaining Eldar live on craft worlds, and the ones that survived Slaanesh's birth became the Drukhari. And the only way the Drukhari can exist is by basically engaging in the same depraved shit that got them there in the first place. And so they're stuck there internally, trying to find the next best ecstasy-driven level thing to continue to justify their continued existence, because if they don't, Slaanesh is going to consume them and eat their souls, and they will die and become one with Slaanesh, or be consumed by Slaanesh. I'm not sure what happens to them when they die, but they essentially become fodder for Slaanesh, and they don't want that. None of the Eldar, none of the Drukhari want this, and so they find unique and interesting ways to get around it in ways that are either depraved as fuck, or they go on a massive journey, on a massive pilgrimage, on giant starships, continent-sized starships, to try to find the answer to somehow rid themselves of the curse that is the new Chaos God that now wants to consume and eat their souls. And that being said, I think the Eldar serve a very interesting allegory to what humanity is going to turn into if we allow this type of shit to continue. Because, I don't see that very far in humanity's future. I mean, we're already at the step where some countries are first world, and at least the first world countries, we're basically living in health inequality most of the time, but we're still living at a level of excess that is, honestly, like pretty great, despite the fact it could always be better. But what happens if we decide, what, things get so better, like everybody has a house, everybody has a worthwhile job, and everybody, is making a stable enough living, and is also financially stable enough to where nobody feels like they need to try or do anything. So what are they going to do? What are they going to do? All right, we're back. We're basically one step away from facing the Eldar problem, and if anything that we've seen so far from Japan and even in our own country is to be certain, we're already at the point of essentially needing to ask ourselves this question. And because there's enough excess in things in our current reality that we basically take some things for granted, we're already at the possible. We're already showing signs of the possibility that we could end up the same way that the Eldar did, and I think that that's something we seriously need to consider. I mean, just look at the dating market. The dating market is filled with a lot of people who are in demand of women, but not enough women want what's currently, you know, on supply, right? Women are looking for the best fruits and apples in the market and not just whatever the fuck they could get their hands on, right? And if the market is this saturated, they're going to be a little picky about it, right? It's the same sort of we're experiencing a similar sort of mentality. Just we're just there, but it's still we're still suffering from problems. All right, and that in itself isn't the biggest indicator. It's just a sign. All right, it's just a small, very small sign that we're getting to a point to where things are just getting a little ridiculous, right? I mean, like the idea. I mean, okay, I'm not gonna ramble on this and harp on this enough. But the point is that I can totally see this happening. I can totally see the Eldar future happening for humanity, and I don't like it. But yeah, I think the Eldar serve as an interesting example to what Jordan Peterson is saying, which is yeah, like if people need conflict, and if there's not enough conflict and not enough problems to solve, if there isn't any trials and tribulations to be had, well, what are we going to do to fill the void that is a need for something, right? A need to challenge ourselves, a need to overcome an obstacle. What happens when there are no obstacles? Well, we start engaging in stupid fuck shit. And what happens when we engage in stupid fuck shit? It all begins to slowly roll out of control until that pebble becomes a boulder, and suddenly everything goes to shit. So, yeah. Enough said. Moving on.
I think there's something to be said for that.
I'll even rewind it a little bit.
We need it on a silver platter. The first thing we would do is engage in some form of creative destruction just so something unexpected could happen, just so we could have the adventure of our lives. And I think there's something to be said for that. So, and then the last error, let's say, although by no means the last, was this, and this is one of the strangest parts of the Communist Manifesto, is Marx admits, and Engels admit repeatedly in the Communist Manifesto that there has never been a system of production in the history of the world that was as effective at producing material commodities in excess than capitalism. Like that's extensively documented in the Communist Manifesto. And so if your proposition is, look, we got to get as much material security for everyone as possible, as fast as we can, and capitalism already seems to be doing that at a rate that's unparalleled in human history, wouldn't the logical thing be just to let the damn system play itself out? I mean, unless you're assuming that the evil capitalists are just going to take all of the flat screen televisions and put them in one big room and not let anyone else have one. The logical assumption is that, well, you're already on a road that's supposed to produce the proper material productivity. And so, well, that's 10 reasons, as far as I can tell. And so what I saw in that the Communist Manifesto is like seriously flawed in virtually every way it could possibly be flawed, and also all in evidence that Marx was the kind of narcissistic thinker who could think. He was a very intelligent person, and so was Engels. But what he thought when he thought was that what he thought was correct. And he never went the second stage, which is, well, wait a second. How could all of this go terribly wrong? And if you're a thinker, especially a sociological thinker, especially a thinker on the broad scale, a social scientist, for example, one of your moral obligations is to think, you might be wrong about one of your fundamental axioms, or two, or three, or 10. And as a consequence, you have the moral obligation to walk through the damn system and think, well, what if I'm completely wrong here and things invert and go exactly the wrong way? And I just can't understand how anybody could come up with an idea like the dictatorship of the proletariat, especially after advocating its implementation with violent means, which is a direct part of the Communist Manifesto, and actually think, if they were thinking if they knew anything about human beings and the proclivity for malevolence that's part and parcel of the individual human being, that could do anything but lead to a special form of hell, which is precisely what did happen. And so I'm going to close, because I have 3 minutes, with a bit of evidence as well that Marx also thought that what would happen inevitably as a consequence of capitalism is the rich would get richer and the poor would get poorer. So there would be inequality. The first thing I'd like to say is we do not know how to set up a human system of economics without inequality. No one has ever managed it, including the communists. And the form of inequality changed, and it's not obvious by any stretch of imagination that the free market economies of the West have more inequality than the less free economies in the rest of the world. And the one thing you can say about capitalism is that although it produces inequality, which it absolutely does, it also produces wealth. And all the other systems don't. They just produce inequality. So
That's an interesting point of view to look at this. But let me see here. I had a thought and I think I lost it. You know what? I'll just leave it. Moving on.
here's a few stats. Here's a few free market stats, okay? From 1800 to 2017, income growth adjusted for inflation grew by 40 times for production workers and 16 times for unskilled labor. Well, GDP rose by a factor of about 0.5 from 1 AD to 1800. So from 1 AD to 1800 AD, it was like nothing, flat. And then all of a sudden, in the last 217 years, there's been this unbelievably upward movement of wealth. And it doesn't only characterize the tiny percentage of people at the top who, admittedly, do have most of the wealth. The question is, not only, though, what's the inequality? The question is, well, what's happening to the absolutely poor at the bottom? And the answer to that is, they're getting richer faster now than they ever have in the history of the world. And we're eradicating poverty in countries that have adopted moderate free market policies at a rate that's unparalleled. So here's an example. One of the UN millennial goals was to reduce the rate of absolute poverty in the world by 50% between 2000 and 2015. And they defined that as $1.90 a day. Pretty low, but you have to start somewhere. We hit that at 2012, 3 years ahead of schedule. And you might be cynical about that and say, well, it's kind of an arbitrary number, but the curves are exactly the same at $3.80 a day and $7.60 a day. Not as many people have hit that, but the rate of increase towards that is the same. The bloody UN thinks that we'll be out of poverty defined by $1.90 a day by the year 2030. It's unparalleled. And so the rich may be getting richer, but the poor are getting richer too. And that's not the... Look, I'll leave it at that because I'm out of time. But I'll leave it with this.
Okay, so I see I see the point that he was making there, but at the same time, I'm like, is this accounting for inflation? I feel like this isn't accounting for inflation. Like, yeah, maybe the poor are getting richer as well, but it's like, you're still poor if a candy bar was $1, and then suddenly the economy gets inflation hits, and then suddenly, people are getting paid more in jobs now, and there's more loose change in the form of dollar bills to be had. What you may get more money and more dollars now, but the things that were once $1 are now probably twice or thrice that. What could have been a dollar candy bar is now like $3.50 something cents. So while, yeah, the poor are now getting richer, that's not at all accounting for the problem of inflation. I see his point, but I'm not sure how to rationalize that other than, what about the inflation? Maybe he's talking specifically about the you know uh the the poorer countries, the non-economically stable countries, but I have no idea. I have no idea whatsoever.
The poor are not getting poorer under capitalism. The poor are getting richer under capitalism by a large margin. And I'll leave you with one statistic, which is that now in Africa, the child mortality rate in Africa now is the same as the child mortality rate was in Europe in 1952. And so that's happened within the span of one lifetime. And so if you're for the poor, if you're actually concerned that the poorest people in the world rise above their starvation levels, then all the evidence suggests that the best way to do that is to implement something approximating a free market economy. And so, thank you very much.
I have a chair, I can sit there. It has helped me a lot, okay.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Dr. Zizek.
Thank you. Okay. First, a brief introductory remark. I cannot but notice the irony of how Peterson and I, the participants in this duel of the century, are both marginalized by the official academic community. I'm supposed to defend here the left liberal line against neoconservatives. Really? Most of the attacks on me are now precisely from left liberals. Just remember the outcry against my critique of LGBT plus ideology.
You know, he's not the only one. He's not the only one. I'm pretty sure every left-leaning liberal probably feels the exact same thing. I could attest to this because I'm not just an example of it. I see it everywhere. Anyone who has any critical thought whatsoever is an absolute monster that must be eradicated according to the fucking nitwits and halfwits on the stupid fucking left side of the spectrum. And let me fucking tell you, if you're gonna make an enemy out of the people who are going to be in a better position to help you, then by all means, continue to flounder and make stupid nonsense of yourselves, and just let yourselves die, sputter, and wilt like the fucking garbage you are. It's your fucking loss. It's just so stupid. Moving on.
And I'm sure that if the leading figures in this field were to be asked if I am fit to stand for them, they would turn in their graves even if they are still alive.
That's a fucking statement, too.
So let me begin by bringing together the three notions from the title: happiness, communism, capitalism. In one exemplary case, China today. China in the last decades is arguably the greatest economic success story in human history. Hundreds of millions raised from poverty into middle-class existence. How did China achieve it? The 20th century left was defined by its opposition to the two fundamental tendencies of modernity: the reign of capital with its aggressive market competition, the authoritarian bureaucratic state power. Today's China combines these two features in its extreme form: strong authoritarian state, wild capitalist dynamics. And it's important to note, they do it on behalf of happiness of the majority of people. They don't mention communism to legitimize their rule. They prefer the old Confucian notion of a harmonious society.
Except there's a lot of fuck shit that resulted from this mentality and the way that China does things. Again, nobody talks about Uyghurs. And Disney filmed Mulan near a concentration camp at one point. I don't know if people still remember that, but I do. I remember a lot of stupid things that companies do. I'm just an encyclopedic knowledge of the dumbest shit that people have done, especially from my own fucking country. And let me tell you, I hate fucking hypocrites. Disney being one of the biggest. That's all I'm going to say.
But are the Chinese any happier for all that? Although even the Dalai Lama justifies Tibetan Buddhism in Western terms of the pursuit of happiness and the avoidance of pain, happiness as a goal of our life is a very problematic notion. If we learned anything from psychoanalysis, it is that we humans are very creative in sabotaging our pursuit of happiness. Happiness is a confused notion. Basically, it relies on the subject's inability or unreadiness to fully confront the consequences of their desire. In our daily lives, we pretend to desire things which we do not really desire, so that ultimately the worst thing that can happen is for us to get what we officially desire. So I agree that human life of freedom and dignity does not consist just in searching for happiness, no matter how much we spiritualize it, or in the effort to actualize our inner potentials. We have to find some meaningful cause beyond the mere struggle for pleasurable survival. However, I would like to add here a couple of qualifications. First, since we live in a modern era, we cannot simply refer to an unquestionable authority to confer a mission or task on us. Modernity means that, yes, we should carry the burden, but the main burden is freedom itself. We are responsible for our burdens. Not only are we not allowed cheap excuses for not doing our duty, duty itself should not serve as an excuse. We are never just instruments of some higher cause. Once traditional authority loses its substantial power, it is not possible to return to it. All such returns are today a postmodern fake. Does Donald Trump stand for traditional values? No. His conservatism is a postmodern performance, a gigantic ego trip. In this sense of playing with traditional values, of mixing references to them with open obscenities, Trump is the ultimate postmodern president. If we compare Trump with Bernie Sanders, Trump is a postmodern politician at its purest, while Sanders is rather an old-fashioned moralist. Conservative thinkers claim that the origin of our crisis is the loss of our reliance on some transcendent divinity or higher value. If we are left to ourselves, if everything is historically conditioned and relative, then there is nothing preventing us to indulge in our lowest tendencies. But is this really the lesson to be learned from mob killing, looting, and burning on behalf of religion? It is often claimed that, true or not, religion makes some otherwise bad people do good things. From today's experience, I think we should rather stick to Steve Weinberg's claim that while without religion, good people would have been doing good things and bad people bad things, only something like religion can make good people do bad things. More than a century ago, in his Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky warned against the dangers of godless moral nihilism. If God doesn't exist, then everything is permitted. The French philosopher André Glucksmann applied Dostoevsky's critique of godless nihilism to September 11th. And the title of his book, Dostoevsky in Manhattan, suggests, as this title suggests, he couldn't have been more wrong. The lesson of today's terrorism is that if there is a God, then everything Even blowing up hundreds of innocent bystanders is permitted to those who claim to act directly on behalf of God. The same goes also for godless Stalinist communists. They are the ultimate proof of it. Everything was permitted to them since they perceived themselves as direct instrument of their divinity, of the historical necessity of progress towards communism.
Interesting. But all of this, what this is really highlighting is that we need to really factor in not necessarily the idea at play, but the intent behind it. And so, what he's really saying here is that instead of focusing on the ideas that are being championed, we should be focusing more so on the intent behind the ideas. Because it's one thing to say that what you're doing is for God, it's another thing to actually do it and then see the result of it, which usually and possibly could be utter destruction, as well as misery and suffering among all of the usual bells and whistles. And if the result of your need to justify your reasons and existence has anything to do with making other people's lives miserable as a result, then that's basically not an idea worth following to some. And a lot of people do justify a lot of terrible things under some grand ideal, and some people, you know, go as far as to say that the ends justify the means, but for a lot of people, the ends do not justify the means. The means themselves are what's awful. And so how do you resolve this issue? You create a system that helps to alleviate these issues without the need of some moral hierarchical need or return to standard, right? You basically create a system that prevents these things from being a problem, and the only way you can create that system is if you understand what's the problem at that's at work here. And here's an example. Let's take the Luigi incident for example. The healthcare system is a shambles. Could this have been prevented? Absolutely. Luigi probably wouldn't have needed to shoot the healthcare CEO in the goddamn back if the fucking healthcare industry bothered to actually give a shit about its recipients. Are they going to change their ways as a result of this? No. But this incident did happen, and though we do not agree with the fact that it had to happen in this way, some people will justify the means as a necessity for the need to change, the need for a change, a new action to take place. And while most people will certainly say that this does not justify the means for the change, it is going to be without question that the only reason why the change will happen and take place is if more people start to do this. And so, unless the healthcare CEOs decide that they're going to change the way they do their business, if they decide to change the way they run their insurance companies going forward, that actually helps people rather than slowly and softly kills them. Hell, even if that, I mean, they're going to face the same issue. All right, the Luigi incident is not going to be an isolated case. The Luigi incident isn't even like a question of why did it happen. It's a question of will it happen again. All right, it's the same thing about the question of violence. All right, people always say like, well, violence isn't the answer, and I would agree. Violence isn't an answer. It is a question. And depending on the person, the answer is yes. For Luigi, in this instance, the question of will the healthcare industry ever decide to change its ways at any point in time? No. So, does the question of violence need to be enacted? Yes. This was the decision he came up with, and as a result, they're now thinking twice about the decision to fuck over their customers. Just look at fuck they're not even really customers either. Just look at some of the things that they have done. They have actually some insurance companies have actually bothered to alter the way they do their policy and have also been a bit more generous than usual as of late. So, as a result of the shooting. And so it is arguable to suggest that the violence was a question that was indeed necessary. Does it justify the violence itself? No. Can you justify the violence itself in any capacity? No. In fact, it heightens more so the problem of the system. Because if violence needed to be enacted for things to change, then the system itself is so flawed that the only way you noticed was because people had to throw it in your face in the form of a gunshot to somebody you know's. I don't know what better way to say this. You fucked up. You people fucked up. And now you're reaping the consequences of your own actions. Fucking fix the problem. Or shut the fuck up about your fucking finger wagging about how, oh, this is an issue, this is a moral problem, we can't be doing this. It's like, well, then fucking fix the problem. It's that simple. Moving on.
That's the big problem of ideologies. How to make good, decent people do horrible things. Second, yes, we should care
I'll rewind it.
to them since they perceived themselves as direct instrument of their divinity, of the historical necessity of progress towards communism. That's the big problem of ideologies. How to make good, decent people do horrible things. Second, yes, we should carry our burden, accept the suffering that goes with it. But a danger lurks here, that of a subtle reversal. Don't fall in love, that's my position, with your suffering. Never presume that your suffering is in itself a proof of your authenticity. Renunciation of pleasure can easily turn into pleasure of renunciation itself. For example, an example not from neoconservatives. White left liberals love to denigrate their own culture and blame Eurocentrism for our evils. But it is instantly clear how this self-denigration brings a profit of its own. Through this renouncing of their particular roots, multicultural liberals reserve for themselves the universal position, graciously soliciting others to assert their particular identity. White multiculturalist liberals embody the lie of identity politics. Next point. Jacques Lacan wrote something paradoxical but deeply true, that even if what a jealous husband claims about his wife, that she sleeps with other men, is all true, his jealousy is nonetheless pathological. The pathological element is the husband's need for jealousy as the only way for him to sustain his identity. Along the same lines, one could say that even if most of the Nazi claims about Jews, they exploit Germans, they seduce German girls, and so on, were true, which they were not, of course, their anti-Semitism would still be a pathological phenomenon because it ignored the true reason why the Nazis needed anti-Semitism. In the Nazi vision, their society is an organic whole of harmonious collaboration, so an external intruder is needed to account for divisions and antagonisms. The same holds for how today, in Europe at least, the anti-immigrant populists deal with the refugees. The cause of problems which are, I claim, immanent to today's global capitalism is projected onto an external intruder. Again, even if the reported incident with the refugees, there are great problems, I admit it. Even all these reports are true. The populist story about them is a lie. With anti-Semitism, we are approaching the topic of telling stories. Hitler was one of the greatest storytellers of the 20th century. In the 1920s, many Germans experienced their situation as a confused mess. They didn't understand what is happening to them with military defeat, economic crisis, what they perceived as moral decay, and so on. Hitler provided a story, a plot, which was precisely that of a Jewish plot. We are in this mess because of the Jews. That's what I would like to insist on. We are telling ourselves stories about ourselves in order to acquire a meaningful experience of our lives. However, this is not enough. One of the most stupid wisdoms, and they are mostly stupid, is an enemy is someone whose story you have not heard. Really? Are you also ready to affirm that Hitler was our enemy because his story was not heard? The experience that we have of our lives from within, the story we tell ourselves about ourselves in order to account for what we are doing is, and this is what I call ideology, fundamentally a lie. The truth lies outside in what we do. In a similar way, the alt-right obsession with cultural Marxism expresses the rejection to confront the fact that the phenomena they criticize as the effect of the cultural Marxist plot, moral degradation, sexual promiscuity, consumerist hedonism, and so on, are the outcome of the immanent dynamic of capitalist societies. I would like to refer to a classic, Daniel Bell, Cultural Contradictions of Capitalism, written back in 1976, where the author argues that the unbounded drive of modern capitalism undermines the moral foundations of the original Protestant ethics. And in a new afterword, Bell offers a bracing perspective on contemporary Western societies, revealing the crucial cultural fault lines we face as the 21st century is here. The turn towards culture as a key component of capitalist reproduction and, concomitant to it, the commodification of cultural life itself are, I think, crucial moments of capitalist expanded reproduction. So the term cultural Marxism, I think, plays the same role as that of the Jewish plot in anti-Semitism. It projects or transposes some immanent antagonism, however you call it, ambiguity, tension of our socio-economic life onto an external cause. In exactly the same way, now let me give you a different, more problematic example. In exactly
Actually, before he moves on to that example, there is one thing I do want to mention that he brings up that made me immediately think about this when he started talking about this. When COVID hit, one of the things that was talked about, but not very widely among the right, at least as far as I've seen, was that a lot of Asian communities and a lot of specifically Chinese Americans were actually accosted and ostracized a little bit. They were kind of given the same sort of treatment that the Japanese did back in World War II. Not this on the same level. Like they weren't really put. Actually, they might have been put in the concentration camps. I don't know, but they were treated on a similar level because of the fact that COVID came from China, and it was called the Wuhan virus initially, and as a result, a lot of people took to that apparently as, well, it's got to be the Chinese's fault. And so they blamed Chinese Americans for the problem that China themselves created if it came from China. That being said, and honestly, it did come from China. There was a lot of evidence to prove that, but it's, anyways. Point being said, with the problem as it stands, he's not exactly wrong when he talks about how people blame others or a third party for a lot of the issues that they face, because as much as like people like to believe that we're better than this, we're technically not. I mean, like, again, bullying Chinese Americans simply because a virus got spread across the world, despite the fact that they were, they might have been born and raised, Chinese Americans, within the country. That doesn't make sense logically, right? It's a logical fallacy that you would blame someone who has nothing to do with China for the reason why a virus got spread from China to the United States. It makes no sense whatsoever, but apparently some people did, in fact, do that. And so that really does beg the question, what exactly is wrong with people to look at a problem and then to immediately want to justify the problem by saying that, oh, well, it's these people's fault? And that's only if it's actually true. Again, I've only heard stories. I haven't met anybody who's actually actually had that problem or has had that issue. I've also never I've also never seen any real sources around the topic. Again, I've only heard brief mentions of it, but I have heard that this was a thing that happened. And so, with that being said, given the example that he was, given the subject matter he's using, that he's referring to, I thought it was kind of interesting to kind of touch on the idea that, yeah, people blame other people for problems that may not even be their fault or even their responsibility. And if Americans did in fact blame Chinese Americans or just Chinese delegates in general for the virus, it really does beg an uncomfortable question of, are we really not that different from fucking from prior to World War II Germany? Are we really that different? And that begs a very uncomfortable question, because if that's the case, what's to stop it from happening again? What's to stop it from happening again? See, this is why we need critical thinking. And this is why stupid people shouldn't be out here saying stupid shit on the daily. I keep saying it. I don't know how many times I need to say it, but if you're not going to actually talk about and actually think through the problems, you probably should shut the fuck up about them. All right? The grown-ups are talking. Let the grown-ups do the talking. All right? I mean, and technically, I'm arguably one of the children basically bitching and whining about a problem because I'm not doing anything about it, but here I am trying to make sense out of the stupidity. Anyways, I thought that was just an interesting little touch-on note. Moving on.
The same way, liberal criticism, antagonism, however you call it, ambiguity, tension, of our socio-economic life onto an external cause. In exactly the same way, now let me give you a different, more problematic example. In exactly the same way, liberal critics of Trump and alt-right never seriously asked how our liberal society could give birth to Trump. In this sense, the image of Donald Trump is also a fetish, the last thing a liberal sees before confronting actual social tensions. Hegel's motto, evil resides in the gaze which sees evil everywhere, fully applies here. The very liberal gaze which demonizes Trump is also evil because it ignores how its own failures opened up the space for Trump's type of patriotic populism. Next point. One should Stop blaming hedonist egotism for our woes. The true opposite of egotist self-love is not altruism, a concern for the common good, but envy, resentment, which makes me act against my own interests. This is why, as many perspicuous philosophers clearly saw, evil is profoundly spiritual, in some sense more spiritual than goodness. This is why egalitarianism itself should never be accepted at its face value. It can well secretly invert the standard renunciation accomplished to benefit others. Egalitarianism often de facto means I am ready to renounce something so that others will also not have it. This is, I think, now comes the problematic part for some of you, maybe the problem with political correctness. What appears as its excesses, its regulatory zeal, is, I think, an impotent reaction that masks the reality of a defeat. My hero is here a black lady, Tarana Burke, who created the Me Too campaign more than a decade ago. She observed in a recent critical note that in the years since the movement began, it deployed an unwavering obsession with the perpetrators. Me Too is all too often a genuine protest filtered through resentment. Should we then drop egalitarianism? No. Equality can also mean, and that's the equality I advocate, creating the space for as many as possible individuals to develop their different potentials. It is, that's my paradoxical claim, it is today's capitalism that equalizes us too much and causes the loss of many talents. So what about the balance between equality and hierarchy? Did we really move too much in the direction of equality? Is there, in today's United States, really too much equality? I think a simple overview of the situation points in the opposite direction. Far from pushing us too far, the left is gradually losing its ground already for decades. Its trademarks, universal healthcare, free education, and so on, are continuously diminished. Look at Bernie Sanders, and I don't idealize him, program. It is just a version of what half a century ago in Europe was simply the predominant social democracy, and it's today decried as a threat to our freedoms, to the American way of life, and so on and so on. I see no threat to free creativity in this program. On the contrary, I see healthcare and education and so on as enabling me to focus my life on more important creative issues. I see equality, this basic equality of chances, as a space for creating differences, and yes, why not, even different, more appropriate hierarchies. Furthermore, I find it very hard to ground today's inequalities, as they are documented, for example, by Piketty in his book, to ground today's inequalities in different competencies. Competencies for what? In totalitarian states, competencies are determined politically. But market success is also not innocent and neutral as a regulator of the social recognition of competencies. Let me now briefly deal with in a friendly way, I claim, with what became known, sorry for the irony, as the lobster topic. I'm far from a simple social constructionism here. I deeply appreciate evolutionary thought. Of course, we are also natural beings, and our DNA, as we all know, overlaps, I may be wrong, around 98% with that of some monkeys. This means something, but nature, I think we should never forget this, is not a stable hierarchical system, but full of improvisations. It develops like French cuisine. A French guy gave me this idea that the origin of many famous French dishes or drinks is that when they wanted to produce a standard piece of food or drink, something went wrong, but then they realized that this failure can be resold as success. They were making cheese in the usual way, but the cheese got rotten and infected, smelling bad, and they said, oh my God, look, we have our own original French cheese. Or they were making wine in the usual way. Then something went wrong with fermentations, and so they began to produce champagne, and so on and so on. I'm not making just a joke here, because I think that it is exactly like this that, and that's the lesson of psychoanalysis, that our sexuality works. Sexual instincts are, of course, biologically determined. But look what we humans made out of them. They are not limited to the mating season. They can develop into a permanent obsession, sustained by obstacles that demand to be overcome. In short, into a properly metaphysical passion that perturbs the biological rhythm, with twists like endlessly prolonging satisfaction in courtly love, engaging in different perversions, and so on and so on. So it's still, yes, biologically conditioned sexuality, but it is, if I may use this term, trans-functionalized. It becomes a moment of a different cultural, however you call it, logic. And I claim the same goes for tradition. T.S. Eliot, the great conservative, wrote, quote, what happens when a new work of art is created is something that happens simultaneously to all the work of art which preceded it. The past should be altered by the present as much as the present is directed by the past. End of quote. What does this mean? Let me mention the change enacted by Christianity. It's not just that, in spite of all our natural and cultural differences, the same divine spark dwells in everyone. But this divine spark enables us to create what Christians call Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit, a community in which hierarchic family values are at some level at least abolished. Remember Paul's words from Galatians. There is no longer Jew or Greek. There is no longer male and female in Christ. A democracy extends this logic to the political space. In spite of all differences in competence, the ultimate decision should stay with all of us. The wager of democracy is that we should not give all power to competent experts. It was precisely communists in power who legitimized their rule by posing as fake experts. And incidentally, I'm far from believing in ordinary people's wisdom. We often need a master figure to push us out of an inertia. And I'm not afraid to say that forces us to be free. Freedom and responsibility hurt. They require an effort. And the highest function of an authentic master is to literally to awaken us to our freedom. We are not spontaneously really free. Furthermore, I think that social power and authority cannot be directly grounded in competence. In our human universe, power, in the sense of exerting authority, is something much more mysterious, even irrational. Kierkegaard, my and everybody's favorite theologist, wrote, if a child says he will obey his father because his father is a competent and good guy, this is an affront to father's authority. And he applied the same logic to Christ himself. Christ was justified by the fact of being God's son, not by his competencies or capacities. As Kierkegaard put it, every good student of theology can put things better than Christ. There is no such authority in nature. Lobsters may have hierarchy, undoubtedly, but the main guy among them, I don't think he has authority in this sense. Again, the wager of democracy is that, and that's the subtle thing, not against competence and so on, but that political power and competence or expertise should be kept apart. In Stalinism, precisely, they were not kept apart, while already in ancient Greece, they knew that they have to be kept apart which is why their popular weight was even combined with lottery often. So where does communism, just to conclude, where does communism enter here? Why do I still cling to this cursed name when I know and fully admit the 20th century communist project in all its failure, how it failed giving birth to new forms of murderous terror? Capitalism won, but today, and that's my claim, we can debate about it, the question is, does today's global capitalism contain strong enough antagonisms which prevent its indefinite reproduction? I think there are such antagonisms. The threat of ecological catastrophe, the consequence of new techno-scientific developments, especially in biogenetics, and new forms of apartheid. All these antagonisms concern what Marx called commons, the shared substance of our social being. First, of course, the commons of external nature, threatened by pollution, global warming, and so on. Now, let me be precise here. I'm well aware how uncertain analysis and projections are in this domain. It will be certain only when it will be too late. And I am well aware of the temptation to engage in precipitous extrapolations. When I was younger, to give you a critical example, there was in Germany an obsession with Waldsterben, the dying of forests, with predictions that in a couple of decades, Europe will be without forests. But according to recent estimates, there are now more forest areas in Europe than 100 years or 50 years ago. But there is nonetheless, I claim, the prospect of a catastrophe here. Scientific data seem to me at least abundant enough. And we should act in a large-scale collective way. And I also think, this may be critical to some of you, there is a problem with capitalism here for the simple reason that its managers, not because of their evil nature, but that's the logic of capitalism, care to expand self-reproduction, and environmental consequences are simply not part of the game. This is, again, not a moral reproach. And incidentally, so that you will not think that I don't know what I'm talking about, in communist countries, those in power were obsessed with expanded reproduction and were not under public control, so the situation was even worse. So how to act? First, by admitting we are in a deep mess. There is no simple democratic solution here. The idea that people themselves should decide what to do about ecology sounds deep, but it begs an important question, even if their comprehension is not distorted by corporate interests. What qualifies them to pass a judgment in such a delicate matter? Plus, the radical measures advocated by some ecologists can themselves trigger new catastrophes. Let me mention just the idea which is floating around of solar radiation management, the continuous massive dispersal of aerosols into our atmosphere to reflect and absorb sunlight and thus cool the planet. Can we even imagine how the fragile balance of our Earth function and in what unpredictable ways geoengineering can disturb it? In such times of urgency, when we know we have to act but don't know how to act, thinking is needed. Maybe we should turn around a little bit. Marx's famous Thesis 11. In our new century, we should say that maybe in the last century, we tried all too fast to change the world. The time has come to step back and interpret it. The second threat, the commons of internal nature. With new biogenetic technologies, the creation of a new man, in the literal sense of changing human nature, becomes a realist prospect. I mean primarily so-called popularly neural link, the direct link between our brain and digital machines, and then brains among themselves. This, I think, is the true game changer. The digitalization of our brain opens up unheard of new possibilities of control. Directly sharing your experience with your beloved may appear attractive, But what about sharing them with an agency without you even knowing it? Finally, the common space of humanity itself. We live in one and the same world, which is more and more interconnected. But
I feel like that Neuralink one was a bit of a dig at Elon, to be honest. I don't have really anything to refute or say about this. It's strangely enough, he's not really saying anything so far that I disagree with, but at the same time, some of it has been kind of going over my head, and it's kind of hard to follow along, and the captions aren't helping either half the time. So otherwise, the gist I'm getting from this is that what he's really saying here is that communism may not be great in the way it's being practiced right now, but it's not. Capitalism isn't exactly all that special either. And though there are certainly some interesting sort of like peacocking between the two, no one seems to have a real answer on how to actually fix currently existing issues. And that's really the main crux of this whole of this whole debacle of this whole debate is that there's a whole lot of issues that aren't being addressed, and the people who are addressing them are doing it from a very specific lens, and none of them are tackling them any better than the other. At least that's the most that I'm getting from this. The other aspect of what I'm seeing here from the way Zizek is approaching this is that he's he's both criticizing and also refuting his own side while simultaneously doing the same thing to the capitalist side. And while that's an interesting sort of way to tackle this debate, I'm trying to figure out where exactly he's going with this. Because the only rational way I'm looking at this is that we need to. He's basically saying what Peterson was saying, which is that we need to think critically. But I don't know. Let's just let him finish his thought, I guess.
attractive. But what about sharing them with an agency without you even knowing it? Finally, the common space of humanity itself. We live in one and the same world, which is more and more interconnected, but nonetheless deeply divided. So, how to react to this? The first and sadly predominant reaction is the one of protective self enclosure. The world out there is in a mess. Let's protect ourselves by all kinds of walls. It seems that our countries are run relatively well. But is the mess the so-called rogue countries find themselves in not connected to how we interact with them? Take what is perhaps the ultimate rogue state, Congo. Warlords who rule provinces there are always dealing with Western companies, selling them minerals. Where would our computers be without coltan from Congo? And what about foreign interventions in Iraq and Syria, or by our proxies like Saudi Arabia in Yemen? Here, refugees are created. A new world order is emerging, a world of. Can I just finish the page? 2 minutes, literally. A world of peaceful coexistence of civilizations, but in what way does it function? Forced marriages and homophobia are okay, just that they are limited to another country, which is otherwise fully included into the world market. This is how refugees, again, are created. The second reaction is global capitalism with a human face. Think about socially responsible corporate figures like Bill Gates or George Soros. They passionately support LGBT, they advocate charities, and so on. But even in its extreme form, opening up our borders to the refugees, treating them like one of us, they only provide what in medicine is called a symptomatic treatment. The solution is not for the rich Western countries to receive all immigrants, but somehow to try to change the situation which creates massive waves of immigration. And we are complicit in this. Is such a change a utopia? No. The true utopia is that we can survive without such a change. So here I think, I know it's provocative to call this a plea for communism. I do it a little bit to provoke things. But what is needed is nonetheless in all these spheres, I claim, ecology, digital control, unity of the world, capitalist market, which does great things, I admit it, has to be somehow limited, regulated, and so on. Before you say it's a utopia, I will tell you, but just think about in what way global market already functions today. I always thought that neoliberalism is a fake term. If you look closely, you will see that state plays today more important role than ever precisely in the richest capitalist economies. So, you know, the market is already limited, but not in the right way, to put it naively. So, a pessimist conclusion. What will happen? In spite of protests here and there, we will probably continue to slide towards some kind of apocalypse, awaiting large catastrophes to awaken us. So I don't accept any cheap optimism. When somebody tries to convince me that in spite of all the problems, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, my instant reply is yes, and it's probably another train coming towards us. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think I'll cut that right there. My only thoughts on that is simply that he has a very interesting point. I I might just be stupid, but he makes a very interesting point. I mean, no one has the right answer to how to solve all the world's problems, and the ones that we do come up with are either naive, stupid, or they're just very flawed in their implementation. And so the answer to the question, of course, is, well, how do we fix the problems? Well, if we only look at things from a very particular lens, we're not going to find the answer. And I think that, you know, where we're trying to go from, where he's trying to get at, is that we need to look at the problems more plainly and more specifically and come up with a rational answer to tackle the problem that is specific to that problem and not necessarily from, well, what can we do from an ideological perspective of how to tackle the problem. He's basically giving the anti neoliberal argument of how do we tackle the problem plainly and concisely and not make it a fucking battle of morals over how we tackle this issue. Because that's where I'm getting from this. And if that is the argument that's being made here, I think I mean I agree with it. I don't really have any fucking ill will about that. Just it's the problem with being so self-absorbed to a specific thought or rationality is in itself limiting. And he was talking about how religion tends to do this, how science tends to do this, and how people who believe in a very specific way of how to live your life, traditions, among other things, they're all limiting factors that contribute to the, like the stifling solutions and ever growing problems of our modern era. And so the question that I think he's trying to ask is, how do we solve the problem? And how do we do it without projecting our own biases into it in a way that dilutes the solution? And I've also learned some things that I didn't even know we did, which is that we were shooting shit into the atmosphere to basically cool it and to make it more sustainable. And that's kind of funny because he does bring up also a counter argument about how we should probably not do anything because it's destroying our ecosystem. But then he immediately shows us an example of how we're doing something and we're probably not even truly thinking through the irrational issue of shooting shit into our atmosphere in order to cool it, and justifying it as we're trying to protect ourselves and the ozone layer, among other things. He brings up a lot of interesting ideas and questions, and the only questions that I have is how do we answer them? And the only way we can answer certain problems is just by tackling the problems as we see them and as they come. And as far as like the problems that results from creating solutions to solving them that might be bred afterwards, well, we just have to tackle them as they come. It's the same process. I think this is what the argument is. I don't know. That's where I'm thinking he's going with this, or where he went with this. But ultimately, I'm just going to leave that up to you guys. Maybe smarter people than myself can probably tell me in the comments precisely what he was saying. I think that's what he was saying, but I could be wrong. But all in all, we will continue this in another video. But all in all, my thoughts so far of this debate is it's very fascinating. But I don't really have much else to say about that I haven't already said when Peterson was on stage. And everything that Zizek was saying is, I mean, there's really not any room for me to debate, because either I'm just not getting what he's saying, or he says exactly how I'm thinking and how I'm feeling about most issues that I honestly I can't refute them because I agree with them, or because logically I sympathize and I agree with his thinking. I don't really know what else to say other than that. But otherwise, yeah. That's my 2 cents on this debate. I will be posting part 2 if you want to see part 2 later on. I know this was a video that was a long time coming, especially for the commenter who recommended this. Thank you again, by the way, for recommending me to watch this debate. And I hope at the very least it was enjoyable for you. I don't know. I'm going to leave that one up to you guys. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day, because hopefully this will be posted fairly quickly before 9 o'clock this morning. But anyways, see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.